Hey, what's going on, guys? What's going on, YouTubers? I'm going to do an early veteran video the day before Veterans Day, a tribute to the Harlem Hellfighters. They were actually the most decorated regiment in World War I. It was the 369th New York Regiment. They had about 40 Caucasian officers, 6 African-American officers, but all the enlisted soldiers were African-American. Many of them were from the South originally, typically North Carolina, South Carolina, and Alabama. But the families had moved to New York for better economic opportunities, and rightfully so. There were still racism in New York, but compared to down south, they didn't have to toil the fields. They could work in industry and work in factory, and some could go to university. Well, the most decorated of the Harlem Hellfighters was Henry Johnson. He was the first, actually, American soldier to win the Croix de Guerre, which is the highest decoration in the French military. Now, the Harlem Hellfighters were one of the few American regiments that were attached to the French military once the U.S. entered World War I. Now, they were a segregated unit in the U.S. Army, but once they got attached to the French Army, they shared the trenches with the French soldiers. They wore a French uniform. They shot French rifles, and they were by and large accepted by the French Army as equals, by and large. William Hayward, a Caucasian man who commanded the regiment, he's a former lawyer in Nebraska, but he had since moved to New York, and he was a proponent and advocate for racial justice. He was the commander of the 369th Infantry Regiment. He had wrote back saying the French are wonderful, and after Henry Johnson had his heroic stand when the Germans were trying to take over his trench, and Henry Johnson, by and large, just had a pistol, a knife, and a flashlight. Like, after his pistol ran out, he just had a knife and a flashlight. But he fought off several German soldiers. It wasn't the Croix de Guerre. Now, years later, after his death, President Obama, rightfully so, awarded Henry Johnson the Congressional Medal of Honor. And Henry Johnson actually was not from Harlem. The reason they were called the Harlem Hellfighters was because the recruiting station was at the Lafayette Theater in Harlem, and most of them were from Harlem, but there were some that were not originally. A lot of them were originally from Alabama, North Carolina, or South Carolina. But some came from the South to come to that station specifically to enlist. Henry Johnson came from Albany, New York, and he was a Pullman porter in Albany by the time America entered World War I. And there's a monument to Henry Johnson in Albany, New York to this day. And in Harlem to this day, there's a statue, a monument that is a tribute to all the Harlem Hellfighters. Now, it was an all-African-American unit. They were the most decorated American unit in World War I, and we need to remember them. Max Brooks, the son of American comedy director Mel Brooks, wrote a really good graphic novel, a historical fiction graphic novel called The Harlem Hellfighters. Now, some of the engagements were historical fiction in that graphic novel, but I read it. Spike Lee recommends it, and I highly recommend it too. Famous African-American film director Spike Lee recommends it. And these guys were heroes. Unfortunately, after World War I had happened, not much had changed after World War I. But many African Americans gave it another shot and helped save democracy again during World War II. And by then, things did change because in 1948, the U.S. military was integrated through Executive Order 9981. And the Harlem Hellfighters were later recognized for their achievement when President Obama posthumously awarded Henry Johnson the Medal of Honor. So, please remember the Harlem Hellfighters on Veterans Day. They were brave men. They did amazing things. Congressman Charlie Rangel petitioned for the Harlem Hellfighters to posthumously give the Congressional Gold Medal, and I have to give props to former Congressman Charlie Rangel for doing that. So, hope everybody's doing well. Take care. God bless you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.